The shortage of skills in labour affects to a greater or lesser degree every single sector of our economy, every area of our lives. It affects our productivity and it affects our public services. We see it in areas such as health and social care, as well as right across our NHS in radiology, audiology, not to mention the estimates from the Nuffield Trust that in England alone, the shortage of doctors could be as high as 12,000 and the shortage of nurses could be as high as over 50,000 in the NHS. We also see shortages in food processing, in agriculture, transport, haulage, construction, butchery, tourism, manufacturing, veterinary medicine, information and cyber security and hospitality. Pressures on supply chains has helped to increase the cost of goods and services, and we see that particularly in the soaring cost of food. The number of vacancies unfilled across the UK is now slightly higher than the number of people registered as unemployed. There is no dispute about the fact that before the EU referendum, before the pandemic, free movement from the EU was a major source of labour in the UK. By 2020, an estimated 55% of foreign-born workers who said that they originally moved to the UK for work-related reasons were born in EU countries. Now, many have left the UK since the UK left the EU, which coincidentally saw a pandemic as well. Even if these workers who have left, even if they wanted to return to the UK, many will find themselves unable to do so because of the UK's restrictive post-Brexit immigration policies. And that's despite the fact our economy, our labour market, needs them to fill the gaps we are suffering and which are acting as a drag on our economy and current and future prosperity. Between Brexit and the start of the pandemic, the number of national insurance numbers issued to people from the EU fell by 24%, impacting our NHS and the number of specialist doctors in the UK from the EU or the European Free Trade Area, more than 4,000 lower than if pre-EU trends had continued. And just to be clear, the shortfall is not being made up by non-EU workers. The situation is particularly acute in rural areas, prompting the Migration Advisory Committee to warn of the risks of rural depopulation, and that's pretty serious. I know the Minister will wish to argue that this serious situation could be addressed by investing in skills and education, and to that I say that does actually require real investment, which is not forthcoming to the levels that we would all wish to see. And secondly, that would not be a strategy that would help the situation right now. It will perhaps help to plug some gaps in the longer term, but our economy, our public and private sectors need help right now. And the situation is particularly worrying for Scotland, given that this is the only country in the UK where our population is projected to fall in the next decade. So, what can be done? What can the government do about this? Well, the government could make it easier for businesses to recruit from abroad as and when they require for all skill levels. Currently, employers are concerned about how onerous, time-consuming and bureaucratic it is to do this, and it shouldn't be. Employers make every effort to recruit locally, but when this does not result in the staffing levels and the skill levels that they need, it should be much easier and smoother than it currently is to tap labour markets from our European neighbours. It makes perfect sense to do so for our employers, for our economic prosperity and for those recruited. Indeed, the government's own MPs are now coming to realise how urgent this situation is when the Honourable Member for Lichfield echoed the Scottish Government's calls for the Home Office to provide long-term stability to migrant workers with a 24-month visa. The reality is, and it pains me to say this, Mr Chair, but the reality is that the UK Government is a prisoner of its own rhetoric and, as a result, has somewhat boxed itself in over visas and immigration, despite the demands of our economy. The temporary exception to the skilled workers criteria under its point-based immigration system for care workers and introducing a bespoke visa for seasonal agricultural workers is absolutely fine as far as it goes, but it is clearly inadequate to address the scale of the workforce challenges faced by the sectors to which it is directed. And it also takes no account of the kind of the needs and in the range of other sectors. Similarly, the Kickstart scheme, well-intentioned as it is simply inadequate to address these challenges. I absolutely believe that the Minister and the Government understands all the difficulties that I've mentioned and other people have mentioned this afternoon. But as I say, I believe it is trapped. It feels trapped by its own rhetoric. And I hope that the Government will go over that and take a common sense approach for the sake of our economic prosperity. In the absence of any attempts to address this very serious situation in a way that I would like and many people across this House would like, which will make the necessary impact on the challenges before us, I urge the Minister to play his part in persuading his Government, at the very least, to allow a Scottish visa to be established so that those who wish to live in and contribute to Scotland's workforce may do so. Similar successful schemes by way of precedent have been established in Canada, Australia, New Zealand and Switzerland on a regional basis so that the different labour needs of Scotland need not suffer from a one-size-fits-all UK approach, since Scotland's demographic and geographical needs are entirely different. In addition, it makes sense to allow asylum seekers who come to the UK to enter our workforce. Currently, they are stuck in hotels or home office accommodation at huge cost to the taxpayer. But many of them have valuable skills that we need, and many of them are desperate to enter our workforce, whilst we suffer skills and labour shortages. This defies all common sense. Refugee Action has calculated that if asylum seekers were given permission to work, this could generate up to £330 million annually for the UK Treasury. So I urge the Minister to do what he can to persuade his Government to support the private member's bill brought forward by my colleague, the Honourable Member for Glasgow North West, the Asylum Seekers Permission to Work bill. I urge him and his Government to support that. The Scottish Government is doing everything that it can with its very limited powers to address skills and labour shortages across Scotland, and has developed a Working with Business action plan, identifying new and existing actions which can be taken forward alongside business and partners such as skills agencies to mitigate the impact of skills and labour shortages and help stimulate economic recovery through a range of employability, skills and sector-specific interventions. But the Minister knows that the real power to address this, the real levers of power that have to be used, lie with the UK Government. Now, if the Minister is going to say that the UK Government is not willing to take the necessary steps to address the shortages which are damaging the economy in Scotland as well as the rest of the UK, if he's not going to take those measures right now, then what he really should do is make the case to his Government to devolve the powers necessary to the Scottish Parliament to tackle this in a more effective and logical way, in the interim before independence for Scotland. That way, in the meantime at least, Scotland can attract and retain those with skills and attributes that we need in our workforce so that our communities, our economy and our country can grow for the benefit of the people of Scotland.